Some children aren't taken in the dark. They aren't always snatched from cribs or chased down streets. They're taken quietly, in hospitals, along river towns, from families who had no power, no voice, and no one listening. Over decades, babies disappeared, not into shadows, but into paperwork, into promises, into quote-unquote better lives decided by someone else. Names were changed, records vanished, histories were refabricated before the children were even old enough to remember who they were. Today's story isn't about monsters in the dark. It's about the silence that allowed this to happen and the lives that were forever altered because of it. Welcome to Strange with Danny. A little maddening, a little strange, sometimes sad, but a whole lot of real life. Disclaimer: before we start, I want to take a moment to say this episode covers stories about children being taken from their families, often quietly and without consent. These stories can be emotional. Just know that it's always okay to pause or skip an episode if you need to. I would understand this one's tough. Listener discretion is advised. Hey strangers! Today's episode is called Taken in Silence. It's mostly about kids, from infants to preteens, being taken from different places, different ways, none of them right whatsoever. How I even got interested in this topic, somehow I got my hands on the book Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. I think my mother-in-law read it and recommended it, so I got it. Either way, I read that. Before that, I obviously knew about trafficking and kidnapping and that sort of thing, but never in my wildest nightmares would I ever think that people and institutions that are in place to help would be taking kids unlawfully. Not always just snatching them off the streets, lying, telling parents in hospitals right after giving birth that their baby had passed, but it hadn't, and taking it and adopting it out and selling it. I will comment now that many of these parents that adopted these kids had no idea of the situation. They were under the impression that maybe they were abandoned or orphaned and that they truly were saving these kids. So maybe a good place to start would be talking about Georgia Tann. She was probably the biggest name in this kind of ring, because that's what it was, a ring of kidnapping, transporting, and selling children. So Georgia Tann was born Beulah George Tann. I'm assuming her middle name was because her father's name was George. Anyways, she was born on July 18th, 1881 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Her domineering father, George, was a judge, and her mother, Beulah, was a teacher. She had a younger brother named Roy. She wanted to be a judge, and her father wanted her to be a concert pianist. She decided early on that she never wanted to marry or have children. So at the time, really, the only work for an unwed woman was social work. So a social worker she became. At some point, she adopted a daughter named June Ann. She got a job at the Mississippi Children's Home Society at the Kate McWillie Powers Receiving Home for Children, where she was the receiving director. Ann Atwood, who was 8 years younger than Georgia and a family friend, also worked here as a house mother, and later it says that they became a couple and lived together in Memphis, Tennessee, with Ann's infant son and Georgia's daughter, when Georgia was fired from the MCHS for questionable child placing methods. Once in Memphis, Georgia was hired at the Tennessee Children's Home Society, the TCHS, at the Shelby County branch. She got the position of executive secretary, but eventually took over the whole organization using quote-unquote aggressive methods. It was in 1924 that Georgia started to traffic children. Tennessee law made it so that it cost around $7 for adoption fees at the time, but Georgia had received as much as $5,000 for some adoptions. She set up many adoptions out of state, basically tore babies and small children from their families and shipped them as far off as possible. Between 1940 and 1950, the agency sent 3,000 children to just New York and California alone. She charged a premium for private adoptions. She'd charge for background checks that she never ran. She'd charge outrageous rates for flights. She charged 5 times the amount for the adoption paperwork. The agency got $61,000 a year from the state, which today's equivalent would be $1,098,413. 31% of that went to her branch in Memphis, which in today's money would be $304,508. Profits were put in a secret bank account for herself, and it is alleged that she kept 80 to 90% of the adoption fees personally. There were some legitimate adoptions, I suppose. Some celebrities adopted from the home, and some came out of it. So I guess you could say that maybe some kids went on to have better lives, but for sure, without doing background checks, or even if she had, lots of stuff falls through cracks, especially back then. So many kids were probably sold to predators and other abusive types, which is just so sad. So to get some of these kids, because some were taken to the home legitimately, but many were not. So she'd use pressure tactics, threaten legal action. She'd trick birth parents into signing their babies over to her custody, many times under false pretenses. So like, a lot of these parents were single mothers or unwed even, in a time that was not acceptable in society, or they weren't that educated, they couldn't read or write. So she'd tell them things to scare them, like that the state would come take them and they'll never get them back. But if they sign custody over to her, that it shows that they're responsible and care about their baby, and when they get on their feet, they can come get their baby back. Easy peasy. But they never see their babies again. They'd be told things like they were fostered or adopted out, and sometimes that they passed away after adoption or foster, or sometimes that they were never even at the home, like they never even existed. Sometimes, and I'm not sure whether it was her herself or some minions of hers or nurses and doctors that were paid off or what, I don't know. But sometimes, parents or even single mothers were told right after birth that either the baby needed medical attention and that they were being taken to be treated, or that the baby had died, which it hadn't, and she'd get the baby and sell it by adopting it out. Absolutely sick. I can't even imagine how many hearts this woman alone broke in her lifetime. If you're a parent, you know there's nothing like the love for your child, whether they're 20, 8, 3, or a baby, or even still in your belly, and to have that child ripped away. Anyway, so she also got babies from inmates and mental institutions, from homes for unwed mothers, where even if adoption was agreed upon, the baby was supposed to stay with the mother for a period of time, at least until they're no longer breastfed, and that barely happened. She usually whisked the babies away immediately. There were cases where parents dropped their kids off at nursery school, and I'm guessing that would be like preschool, so preschool-age children, toddlers, and then told later on that welfare agents had come and taken them away. Can you imagine dropping your kids off at school or daycare just to show up at the end of the day to pick them up and be told that welfare agents took them out of the blue? The fuck? There were times when families did have to place their children in homes or orphanages, loss of employment, illness, just not being able to physically or financially provide. So if they didn't have any other options, they'd have to put their kids in these places. Well, many that put them in Georgia's homes would later be told that their kids had been adopted out, or that they didn't even have a record of their child being placed. I'm not sure if that means no record of the child being placed in their care. That must be what that means, because if it meant no record of the child being placed with a family, then they'd have to account for that child. But imagine leaving your child or children here, coming back when you're squared away to get them, and being told either that they're gone with a new family and you'll never see them again, or you never brought them here. You try to get police involved or whatever, and nobody listens, because at least for this home, there were so many people in the pockets. It's so scary and so sad. So in 1941, the Tennessee Children's Home Society was dropped from the Child Welfare League of America's list of qualifying institutions. What had happened was that an adoptive parent found out that information about the child they had adopted was incorrect. So as I mentioned earlier, many adopting parents didn't know anything. So they'd be told that these kids were surrendered legally from homes and parents that couldn't provide for them. And then she had a judge friend that pushed everything through, so she had legal documents. This same judge, when a woman got divorced, she dissolved the mother's custody and give the kids to Georgia Tann at the society, and then she'd adopt them out to homes better able to provide for the children's care. That was a quote from Georgia Tann. By the way, this is all out there on Google. You can look it up for yourself. It doesn't say allegedly, but it also doesn't show proof, so there's that. This is all alleged. But it says that many of those kids were actually quote, placed into homes where they were used as child labor on farms or with abusive families, end quote. So that was a quote, but it is alleged. So sad. Poor babies, because thousands of kids, they didn't all go to good homes. And it's terrible. While under the custody, there were reports of child physical and SA, neglect, and even murder. It says that Memphis had the highest infant mortality rate in the nation in the 1930s, quote, mainly because of Tann, end quote. These all-female staff at the home were relatively untrained, and many had substance abuse problems. This is a quote from the Wikipedia page of Georgia Tann. Quote, the children were frequently sedated, and those who were challenging to place were allowed to die of malnutrition. Tann regularly ignored doctors' recommendations for sick children, denying them care or medicine, which often led to preventable deaths from illnesses such as diarrhea. While some of her victims are known to be buried in Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee, other children were never accounted for. The exact number of deceased children remains unknown, with estimates of about 500 deaths due to mistreatment, end quote. At the time, even though it was morally and ethically wrong, quote, black market adoptions were not illegal, but on September 11, 1950, an investigation on the society began after getting reports that the agency was selling kids for money, and then Tennessee Governor Gordon Browning started the investigation. Georgia Tann and her minions were accused of making as much as $1 million in profits off the sale of children, but Georgia Tann was never prosecuted as she passed away from uterine cancer just days before the state filed the charges against the society on September 15, 1950. She was 59 years old. So 3 months after her estate was sued for $500,000, her beneficiaries settled out of court for about $54,600. In my opinion, they should have took it all. The beneficiaries should have given it to them after hearing what happened. The Tennessee Children's Home Society was shut down in 1950. Before 1923, Georgia Tann had bought a 14 by 13 foot lot on the Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee. There, she buried 19 of the children that died due to abuse and neglect while under her care. This witch never even gave them headstones, just recorded them somewhere by their first names, such as Baby Joseph and Baby Estelle, thanks to the cemetery that raised money and made them poor babies a monument in their memory. It reads, quote, in memory of the 19 children who finally rest here, unmarked if not unknown, and all the hundreds who died under the cold, hard hand of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, their final resting place unknown, their final peace a blessing. The hard lesson of their fate changed adoption procedure and law nationwide, end quote. It is estimated that Georgia Tann took around 5,000 children, many that were not actually orphaned. Some kids in Tennessee and Arkansas were lured right from their yards while their parents were working and into Georgia Tann's limo. And because of her inner circle and their contributions, such as covering for her, buying kids themselves, or creating and producing false documents, the people she hurt thought it was all legal and legitimate. And even when they were suspicious, nobody believed them or helped. Many never saw their loved ones again, like their parents, children, siblings, but some did. And in this part, we're going to talk about stories from real victims, and some of them did find their families. So listening to Before and After, the non-fictional sequel to Before We Were Yours, when Tennessee finally officially opens up their records of these adoptions, the adoptees, the children that were adopted, have to pay fees. They have to prove that they're TCHS adoptees, then pay fees for the information. So it's $100, I guess, to basically prove you're serious. Then it's $50 for each additional file that's opened, and 25 cents per page copied. This makes me sick. I mean, I get that it's going to be someone's job and it's going to take some work, but I feel like under these circumstances, there's got to be some kind of exception. Some of the money that Georgia Tann's estate had to pay after the lawsuit should have been held somehow, some way in an account for compensation for the children that were sold. Also to note, none of the children were restored to their birth parents. Some had just been taken and sold just weeks and months before, so it was possible to do so. They just didn't. That's a failure right there. This kind of stuff isn't just damage to a kid or a parent, not just breaking a heart. This is soul breaking, if you ask me. If this happened to me, I'd crack, I'd break, I'd never be the same. I'd never be the wife I was before. I'd never be the mother I was before to my other kids. I wouldn't be me. I'd be gone, an empty shell. To be perfectly honest, I don't think I could go on. Maybe there'd be enough hope in there somewhere that my baby is alive and I'll get them back one way or another. I don't know. I feel like as the years ticked by, as I aged and grew old and never found my baby, even if I stayed in this world, I wouldn't have lived a life. I hurt so bad for these families. One story of a survivor comes from her daughter. The mother was adopted as a baby around 9 months old. Her mother was only 19, unwed, and as the baby's father was a man much older and already married, he disappeared after like a month and a half. In a world where an unwed mother is unfit and that baby should be in a, quote, good home, the mother worked her butt off and tried her best to survive and support the baby. She was behind on rent and the landlord made complaints to the courts, and then the baby was on Georgia Tann's radar. The society basically harassed the mother, told her she could go to court and give her baby up, and she refused. Georgia Tann and the society are hard at work with their removal plan for the beautiful baby girl. An employee from TCHS says, quote, if the mother refuses to appear in court, I would commit the baby for adoption as an abandoned and neglected child, end quote. And they took the baby from her, citing that she was an unfit mother. She is stolen, and then weeks later she's sold to new parents. They think they saved this poor baby girl, a baby that was allegedly removed from an unfit mother and taken to a nursery. Her name is changed. They tell her in her teens that she's adopted, and it seems there's just so much resentment and unanswered questions. The adopted parents divorced at some point. Fast forward, when the baby is now an older woman, gets her sealed records, instead of seeing it as a young, desperate single mother trying her best, she can't help but feel that her mother just didn't try hard enough to keep her. This breaks me. For the baby and the birth mother, she never gave her up. She was kidnapped, sold to an unknowing couple. Her name changed at 9 months old. Her birth mother never would have been able to find her, I don't think. She had the names of her biological parents but never looked for them. She died angry with them for giving her away, and that's not even what happened. Another story, a young 26-year-old woman from a religious family gets pregnant by an older married man. Neither wants to marry the other. The young woman is sent to Memphis for the duration of her pregnancy to live with an aunt who has a 1-year-old to help her with their young son. Only the mom and the aunt know because of the stigma at that time. In 1944, she has the baby girl in a home for unwed mothers in Memphis, Tennessee. She wants to keep the baby so badly. The TCHS takes the baby to Georgia's receiving home in Memphis and then to Nashville. And for a few weeks, the baby girl is kept at one of the TCHS homes there. They say they have to take the baby to a different city than Memphis because they can't adopt a baby out in the same city where they are born. She was adopted out in Nashville to a very nice couple, and she had a wonderful life. She did find out that her birth mother had married a few years after she was born. She was never able to have more kids, and that she had spent her life looking for her baby before she passed. This is heartbreaking. To have no options and to give your baby away, I'm not judging at all. I never would. I can't imagine how hard that would be and how painful. Also, how sad to have to give your child up, and then after time, you get your life together, you get married, and then you're unable to have more children. Heart-crushing. But now she has a biological great-granddaughter named after her. In another story, several siblings have been separated. The mother had 4, but then adopted out the last 4. It is not clear whether she had put the first of the last 4 up for adoption through TCHS and then just did the same each time she got pregnant because she knew they couldn't afford more kids. And this happened a lot back in the day because there was no birth control and women just stayed getting pregnant but had so many kids that they could not afford them. Or if she had gone to TCHS with that first of the last 4 and then she was given a proposition that they'd buy any additional babies she got pregnant with thereafter. And this is sad because now the children do wonder, could she just not afford us, or were we created to be sold for money? But the adopted siblings do learn from their biological siblings that they find that they basically had been the lucky ones. The ones that were kept struggled being children in a very poor family. Their dad passed when they were young. Their mom had a bad rep for being a promiscuous woman. They claim they were beaten and mistreated. But the ones that were adopted always felt that they would have rather grown up poor and with their siblings than wealthy. And a lot of them do say the same thing. Another thing Georgia Tann's TCHS did was make up fictional health and family histories for these children being adopted out. She adopted, quote, Jewish babies out to Jewish families, and they weren't actually, saying things like the baby was born to Jewish parents, the father was a med student, the mother died during birth, and the father was too young to raise a baby alone. There's a story about a 15-year-old girl whose parents sent her 2-year-old to the TCHS. They couldn't afford all their kids and hers too. She wanted to keep her daughter so bad, it broke my heart. They later find each other when the baby's in her 30s and a wife and mother herself. Her biological mother tells her that she looked for her for a long time but then gave up because the TCHS told her that her daughter was dead. One of the stories reminds me so much of the fictional book. 4 girls and their brother were taken right from their yard. Their family was one that lived in a shanty on the banks of the Mississippi River. So their mama was beaten up, and it says in a domestic but not by who. She was hospitalized. During that time, there was nobody to care for the kids, so she signed papers for them to get cared for in foster homes temporarily, only to find out when going to collect them when she's released from the hospital that they've already been given away. When she signed those papers, she trusted the people and didn't know what she was signing. That happened a lot. They're told the kids will be cared for temporarily until they're ready to collect them again, but the papers actually said they were surrendering them to Georgia Tann and her TCHS. And there was really nothing parents could do. Georgia Tann had people in her pockets, she had money and power, and in most cases these parents were illiterate and poor. In one case, the parents do find 2 of their 3 kids, but are unable to get them back. The dirty judge favors with Georgia Tann and the TCHS, stating that the kids were now better off, basically. Kids would be told that they're all staying together and going to the same place, just to be torn apart immediately. In one case, a little girl and her 2 brothers are dropped off on the courthouse steps by their mother because her husband no longer wants them and they can't afford them. The TCHS picks the 3 kids up in a big black limo, tells them they're going together just to pull up to a building and remove the little girl. She is left at the building for only babies and toddlers. Her 2 older brothers are taken somewhere else unknown, probably temporary foster homes, but not sure. The biological grandparents find out and try to get the kids, but they're told that they're all gone already, and at that time the little girl was sitting right upstairs. One young couple had their first baby, a son, and the next morning were told that the baby passed away in the nursery. 2 other mothers in the room were told the same thing right then as well, but they were all tired and groggy and recovering and not quite sure the circumstances. They trusted what they were being told. They had no reason not to. They never had any inkling of the scandal. But later, they started to have doubts because 3 babies, if not more, on the same night in the same room, all passing away suddenly was unlikely. Years down the road is when the news breaks about Georgia Tann and her TCHS. The parents then truly believed that their firstborn son was stolen that night. I think, for me, it's all terrible, and I couldn't cope with any of the situations as a mother or a child. Having your baby taken from you, all those young moms told that they're unfit and they can't keep their baby, and having them torn from you and sold to some stranger. All those parents elated at the birth of a new baby then told their baby died shortly after. In reality, it didn't. It was kidnapped and sold legally, quote unquote. And how many newborn infant babies did she and her freaking henchmen and underlings leave lying in cribs to die because they were deformed or sick or deemed not beautiful enough? One of the survivors was one of those babies. She was tongue-tied and her cries sounded funny because of it. She was allergic to cow's milk and had a bad rash and scabs all over. She was starving because she couldn't drink the cow's milk. A couple came in and Georgia Tann herself had a baby boy picked out for them, but they heard the weak, strange cries of another baby back in a crib in the corner. Georgia tried not to let them back to that baby and insisted on the baby she had picked out, but they got past her and they left with that baby. The baby who probably would have passed away had they never came to that orphanage. Imagine being old enough to remember your parents and siblings and to remember being taken with your siblings and that was the only thing that made it only just a tiny bit less scary, and then you're ripped away from them. And how many poor kids were sent to homes or parents that abused them in any way? and that Georgia Tann was never brought to justice to answer for any of this. Quote, "We need to be given peace and freed from the misery that comes from not knowing and allowed to live with the truth before we pass from this world." End quote. And that was a quote from a letter from a Tennessee Children's Home Society adoptee to her unknown birth family. So that's it for this part of Taken in Silence. As we wrap this episode up, it's important to remember that behind every document, every record, and every unanswered question, there was a child, confused, frightened, and unaware that their life was being permanently altered. There were parents who searched, siblings who wondered, and truths were buried beneath silence. We may never know every name or every story, but remembering them now matters. Speaking these histories out loud matters, because silence allowed this to happen to at least 5,000 children, their birth families, and their adopted families, and awareness is how we make sure it never happens again. Although sadly, I think this will always be a horrific reality, something that will continue to happen. The people may change, the ways they procured the children may change, but it will always happen, but we have to try to end it. Thank you for hanging with me on Strange with Danny and holding a space for those whose voices were taken from them. Stay strange. Bye!